And welcome. So glad you could join us today. I know today's discussion is going to be very interesting. It seems to be a hot topic. Lots of attendees today. Conversations about careers always seem to tweak interest from a lot of folks. So hopefully, we're going to demystify some things for you over the next hour or so. My name is Colleen Jones. I'm a senior coach here at the Roundtable. And before we get started, I'd like to just take a quick moment to share something that's very close to our hearts here at the Roundtable. So at the Roundtable, we're committed to making an impact. It's one of our values. And one of the ways that we're doing that is through our partnership with Inspire. Inspire is a charity that supports the education of Indigenous youth. And so to honor the legacy of the 215 children whose unmarked graves were found in Kamloops, BC, we've set a goal for ourselves to fund 215 university scholarships over 5 years. And so if you're looking for more information or want to join us in that effort, you can see some information on your screens. And I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Oakville, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, which is part of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat peoples. And I'd encourage you to consider what you might want to acknowledge based on where you're situated today. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you a quick note on how you can participate today. We do have everyone muted, but the chat is open. And at the Roundtable, we're all about interactive sessions and collective impact, so please don't be shy. We'd love for you to share your thoughts, your questions, your ideas, what's coming up, either in the Q&A or in the chat. Feel free to pop it in there, and I'll be watching that throughout the session and make sure that these ladies are answering your questions as we go along. For those of you that might be new to us, we at the Roundtable help organizations unleash collective impact by optimizing the passion of high potential leaders, unleashing the exponential power of teams, and building high performance cultures where people want to stay. And we do this through group, team, and one-on-one coaching, helping leaders build the mindsets and behaviors that matter most. So today, let's get into the good stuff. Today, we're hearing from CHROs who are going to dig into those questions that no one ever really answers for you related to our career. So leading our discussion today is our founder and president, Glyne Roberts McCabe. That's Glyne like Shine. Glyne is a certified executive coach with over 30 years of experience leading teams and with a specialized focus on accelerating the development of high potential leaders. Joining Glyne, we have Anna Petosa and Nicola Deal. Sorry, Nicola. Anna is a seasoned people operations leader with over 25 years of experience across a wide array of industries, from startup to global organizations. Needless to say, she's seen almost everything when it comes to HR and careers. And since leaving her own big corporate roles, she's been reminded that career is really just one aspect of your life. And so, really, the value of keeping that in perspective. And I know she'll share more about that today in our conversation. Also joining us is Nicola Deal, CPO at Dental Corp. Nicola oversees the company's people and culture strategy and also brings vast experience from a wide array of executive level HR roles across many industries around the globe, from startup to large global organizations. Nicola has led, I think, almost every HR function as I sort of reviewed your background, Nicola, and feels incredibly grateful for the growth she's experienced personally through her career and all that she's learned about herself as she's made her way through her career journey. So she'll share some of that today as well. So with that, I'll hand things over to you, Glyne, to kick off the conversation.
Thank you, Colleen. It is great to be here. I mean, those of you who are new to our webinars know that we keep things pretty casual around here. This is kind of like to think of this as the bubble where we get to talk about the real issues and the real things and what's actually on our minds. So what I really want to encourage you to do, I was saying this before we got on the call. I get to talk to Nicola and Anna whenever I want, really. I mean, Nicola's a new friend of mine, so I'm forcing myself on her, truth be told. But this is for you. This is for you. I've kind of figured out my own career path and done it. But what prompted this topic for me was, as coaches and, in the work that we do, we get to sit in on a lot of conversations that are with really ambitious people looking to get ahead. And what I've observed myself over the years is there the things that are said, and then there are the things that are not said. There's the implicit and the explicit, and sometimes the things that are implied don't really get that clarity. So that was one of my motivations, was to kind of unpack that a little bit. And I'm thrilled that I've got two really seasoned CHROs here with us today, or I guess the new word is CPO, isn't it? Chief People Officer. CPO's with us today, and we're going to go into all the corners. But whatever questions you have, throw it in the chat because I want you to get, your question answered today. All right, so I'm going to start with, I think what really we see a lot in the work that we do is we're working with really ambitious people and they're getting ready to go to the next level. And we always have an expression at the round table that, what got you here won't get you there. And I think that there's always these jumps. There's certain leadership levels where it's whether you become the first time manager or that leader of leaders or that executive leadership, where expectations shift, but they're not always made really visible. So I would love to kind of kick this off, and maybe Nicola, I'll start this one with you. What are the biggest expectation shifts you see when people are making those transitions? And particularly, I know we have a lot of people that are in that kind of director, VP cohort level and a bit senior. What do you see and what would you say?
So they are. I think that you have to be really intentional about what that step change is. So I think the
Mhm.
intentionality that you bring in that strategy of, okay, how am I going to show up and it's going to feel really different? I'm really going to show that I have leveled up here into a new role. Um, I could see that it was a lack of clarity around what that exactly means
Mhm.
behaviorally. And so we actually went out and created this framework with exactly what the leadership behaviors are at every level across our values to articulate exactly what it means. And I just want to share some of the themes that we see when you see those really big jumps. Because I think at that manager level, your focus is really on how to build high performing teams and how to lead with humanity. So keep your humanity. I think, just learning to balance, very high humanity and people leadership skills with high performance. And I think having both of those as the focus at that manager level becomes really important. When you're talking about moving into a director, you're really needing to think organizationally and create strategies that are having business impact. That's really the big change. But it also means that you're no longer spending the time doing the work. You can be a quality manager of the work that's being done by your teams, but you're spending the time in areas like giving a lot more context of the organization to your team, talking about how we evolve quality standards, creating a vision for the future of how our function or our team is going to add value and how we're going to be perceived by the business, and really driving this vision that people can feel is an aspiring state that they want to be into. I think that you're building stakeholder relationships that are long term and trustworthy so that there's this, jelly bean jar of trust so that you can lean into harder conversations to move the needle, and you're driving better collaboration and cross, team impact. So I think you're consciously and very intentionally spending time on higher order. When you start moving into VP, we talk about that being you becoming an architect of talent. How do I think about the talent within my team and thinking about the future? How do I become an architect of culture? So you're really starting to set what that looks like and thinking in a longer way. You're thinking much longer term. You've got a 3 to 5 year vision. So we've really tried to articulate what those step changes are, but I really think that sitting down and having a plan and a strategy about how you step into that new role to create more value. You're in that role to basically figure out how to create more value for the organization.
You know what? I love that. And I love the way you sort of articulate it as you go up. It gets wider, right? And I think about that's often
Yeah.
the thing that I see tripping people up is that they've been very good at looking at their functional area. They're very knowledgeable about their functional area, but they haven't looked across. They haven't been investing in developing the breadth of understanding, which can start to get in the way, as you start moving up the ladder. Anna, what would you add to this?
I think that Nicola covered a lot of it. I think the only thing I would add is I think you move from being the doer to
Mhm.
being the enabler.
Mhm.
And I think what I've seen with leaders, especially moving into the director and VP level, is about delegation and letting go.
Yeah.
So that, because they're so used to being rewarded for delivering and getting things done and being the go-to person, that letting go of that and delegating to the team isn't easy for everybody. And I think I would summarize it by saying you stop being the go-to person and you create go-to people on your team.
Mhm.
And I've seen that be a really big staller because people are still kind of just holding on to everything. And so it goes from doing to enabling is how the only other thing I would add.
Yeah, I love that you're touching on that because I do think that's a really tricky one. And I think it's where do you get your personal juice, right? And I think that one of the things that I think about a lot is unfortunately in many organizations, the way up is up a ladder. It is through leadership. And and yet if you are such a strong individual contributor, um, what are your options, right? So I think a lot of people feel stalled out in their careers because the options aren't necessarily there in their organization. But like when you think about the telltale signs that somebody really is not letting go, like what are the conversations that tend to happen? Like I'm curious in the hallway conversations and the things where, you're kind of looking and saying that person's not letting go enough because I see people who say, but I'm under so much pressure. We've got to deliver the results. I have to get in there and do it. That's the hard thing to navigate, I think, right? You still want the results. I'm short-staffed, but then I'm getting penalized for being in the weeds. How do you
I
navigate
think
that?
leaders still do need to be across the details. So in the weeds enough so that you know what's happening in your teams. But really, what I talk about is that your job is to elevate the quality of work and to be that person that's really evolving the standards. So if they've got to sort of do the work, but you're in their coaching and you're setting that vision of what impact we want to be making so that you're always sorry, that you're just sitting there as like a coach and support for the work to be done. I think there's just that fear of letting go of control, whereby, am I going to be perceived as valuable if I'm not hands-on doing the work? And that
Mm.
that loss of feeling like I'm valued. But the reality is the value that you can create. Not doing things that can be done by other people is just so much greater for the organization. And so I think once people feel safe enough to know that that's how their leader perceives their work and their value, I think that's the unlock. Mhm.
And
And I think and the danger that I've seen is if you're not able to move to that delegation, then you become a bottleneck. And then the
Mhm.
conversation becomes, I don't know, Anna's team is missing deadlines. They can't seem to make a decision. And it's because my inbox is full of all these decisions that need to be made, but I can't get to them fast enough to give my team the momentum to move on. And
Mhm.
so, what I've seen is when you stretch your team and you delegate, but they know you're there, they know you have their back. So if something goes wrong or there's a misstep, you've got them. The momentum that is created is so magical because it's like, what they feel is, oh, I've succeeded. Okay, I'm going to try the next thing because that last thing scared me, but I got
Yeah.
it. Now I'm going to do the next thing. Now, and then all of a sudden, you have freedom as a leader to really
Mm.
go back to what Nicholas said, put on your strategy hat, put on the cross collaboration across the departments and the organizations, build the partnerships with the other departments that you need to deliver in your own line of business, and your team is feeling trusted, motivated, and the momentum, it just keeps going.
The
Can
other
I
thing
create a
too,
slight
yeah.
differentiation? I'm just thinking about that. Well, when you're sitting there and you've got a portfolio and you're figuring out what to delegate, I think a good rule of thumb is to say, if it's keeping the business running and it's operational, it's repeat activities, like definitely delegate that. What you probably want to be playing in, and certainly I still hold some projects myself to deliver because they are really requiring strategic thinking and judgment that I'd rather keep at my level. And so I'm not saying that you delegate everything. And I think it's an important point that you don't come in and say, okay, great, I'm going to push all my work down. It's just the having the discernment to know, there's not value created by me, doing some repeatable daily task. There are other people that can do that really well. I'm going to keep my time for the bits that I think I'm uniquely positioned to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I see a question coming in from Dushi, and this is the question that and
Mm.
sorry, Dushi, if I butchered your name like line, I apologize. But I think this is the question, and this is the thing that I see people struggling with. So I want to kind of challenge this, like saying, oh, delegate, get your team involved. But Dushi's saying the thing, like, so there's so many restructures and layoffs. Many are losing seniority. Oftentimes we have to go back down to the grade level. So how do you build momentum with that? What is a leader to do? The pressure doesn't, I've never seen an organization go, no, okay, let's reduce your targets because your team's down a couple of headcount. That never happens. So, what is the shift that leaders need to make in that situation?
I mean, I would say be ruthless about your priorities and learn to say no because you can't do it all. And I think as a leader, that's where it's so important for you to see the connection of what you're doing and how that impacts the overall business. So how does that impact launching a product? How does that impact increasing revenue? You know, whatever your business is in
Mhm.
versus the things that you've been doing that you don't stop and think about. If I stop doing this today, who's going to notice? Is it
Right.
important? I think we just get stuck in, I'm really good at this. People seem to like it. I'm going to continue producing it. Well, we only have so many hours in a day. I use the analogy of, you can't put 50 pounds in a 20-pound bag. So what are the things you can get rid of and no one will notice? And where can you amplify the stuff that is really going to have an impact? And that takes courage because
I was just going to say,
you got to start saying no to stuff,
yeah.
right? Which isn't easy to do.
Yeah, and we did a session in January with our good friend Leanne Davey, who is releasing her new book called Thought Load. And one of the things she talks about in the book is it's not your workload that's killing you. It's actually the thought load, which has three components to it, right? It's the cognitive load, like the to-do list, everything we have to do, but it's also the emotional burden that we carry. And then that's divided by the energy we have. So if we're energy depleted, right, we're going to be in bad shape. And I think with that cognitive load, one of the strategies is what are the outcomes we're actually driving towards?
Mhm,
What I see is a lot of people in organizations looking at their activities and their outputs.
mhm.
That'll keep you really busy and maybe a bit productive, but is it really driving to the outcome? Right. And I think that's what Anna, you're saying. And it does take courage, but you also, as the leader, have to have clarity to know and if you don't know, you have to have that conversation with your boss to say, what are the top three things for us this year? If we only did three things this year, what are going to be the big three? Right. And I think that's really one of the step changes. Because I think to your point, a lot of us get a lot of juice. And if you're somebody who's an achiever, it's hard to back off of a goal once it's been put in front of you. Right?
Yeah, and the other thing I just want to point out, I was just having this conversation with a client the other day where they wear busyness like a badge of honor.
Yeah, 100%.
And I was like, you need to stop. You need to stop that. You need to stop talking about how busy you are and how many hours you're working. Like, start talking about the outcomes and the impact to the business. Busyness and working 14 hours a day is not a badge of honor. And as a leader, you need to stop talking about that
Mm-hmm.
and give your teams permission, create the trust for them to push back as well. Because I just find it's becoming a trend. It's like
Mm-hmm.
every meeting opens up with how busy everybody is. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's not productive. And we need to stop the cycle.
Can I just share a thought I was having? That
Yeah.
that that question that was just asked was really about like what happens if I have to re-enter the workforce at a lower level. And I just wanted to share an insight, which was I quite consciously took a job at sort of a level down when I was in financial services because it gave me a breadth and an experience in a portfolio that I knew would be a long play.
Mm,
And I just want to say that if you are in a scenario where you are going to take a job because there's one available at the timing where you need one, see if there's a way to really make it fit your career narrative
mm,
or a longer play in terms of I don't think that we have to be obsessed about taking steps down. I've done it and it was the right decision for me in the long term. And so I don't think we need to be afraid of that. Obviously, it hurts if there's a financial impact there, but I think going in and just committing yourself to your career, great people will just get back there. It'll happen. People want to work with great people, but I think try and go after breadth or some area of work or experience, because I think our CVs and our career assets are really just a summary of these experiences that we have that we now know how to do other things. So I just wanted to see if you can try and take a job that helps you there in the longer term. I think helps. Yeah.
Oh, Nicola, I love that angle on that question. That's not how I interpreted it, but I love that piece because when I think about my career, I took several steps back actually, because I wanted certain experiences. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. I think there's times in your career where you can take those risks before you have the mortgage and all those
I've
things. If you're in
also,
your 20s,
right.
do that, right?
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
There's also, I think one of the smartest things I did was work for a leader where I learnt infinitely more from.
Mm.
That was just a really good investment in career. So I just wanted to reframe that. It's not,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
I love that because I think it's such a good point. Because, and I remember talking to a senior leader years ago who'd had the incredibly successful career, and he said, I never focused on the destination, like the
Right,
destination being the title. Because I said, did you always want to be a CEO? And he's like, no. He
right.
said, I always thought about the journey. What's
Yeah.
the journey I'm on? And what are the things that I want to learn about and that I want to try and I want to be a part of? And that kind of fits in. Trevor had thrown a question in the chat earlier that I'd kind of like to pull into this. His question is, how can you blast off in a career and getting promoted fast? I feel like Trevor is a really ambitious guy and mentored in getting there along the way. What advice would you have for early career people to get in there, get fast? If you could give them were to give Trevor 2 or 3 words of wisdom, what would they be?
I don't want to be controversial, but I am going to tell you what I honestly think. Um,
This is
early
what
in
we're here
careers,
for.
early in careers, it's kind of not the person that's there the longest that gets promoted. Like really, promotions are a meritocracy. And I think thinking about how it is that you're going to be the one that's promoted if a promotion becomes available is really the question that I'd ask you, which is how are you creating a really well thought through development plan, asking super curious questions that don't feel demanding, but feel really self empowered in the way that you're creating a development plan that says, what actions would you suggest I take to make sure I'm reaching peak performance in my current role? And really asking for feedback so that you can take that into a development plan shows your leader that A, you're really ambitious and driven, but also that you are taking full responsibility and that you've got a really growth mindset. It just means that that leader notes that. They literally put it in their brain and say, that person's going somewhere. They have the humility to ask for feedback. There's not an entitlement. There's really a like, how do I earn that? And so I think having a well thought through development plan, I think on the side, there are so many incredible ways to get upskilling in new areas that I think just having a development plan that is also keeping you really aware of bringing the outside in, what's happening in the broader market, in your industry, upskilling into what are some of those skills, because leadership and people skills become more and more important the further up you go. How are you learning more of those, listening to amazing podcasts and then applying it? How do you really think about your development? And then I would honestly just be making sure that you're just doing an outstanding job. Those things being true, ambition, doing a fantastic job, and showing some of those human skills, I think you're going to get promoted at some point. At some point, because people just want those people with growth mindsets and agility with learning and the humility to ask for feedback and self-empowerment to sit there and say, I'm going to own this and I'm going to drive it. Any feedback? I think people just want to give those people more responsibilities. I think that great careers do happen. I think they do because we just want to put those people into leadership.
Anna, what do you say?
Um, what I would add is shifting the narrative from I want to be promoted, I want more to I want to be more impactful. I want to contribute more to the business. How do I do that? Where are some areas that I can dig in and really contribute. And I would say that the promotions that I've seen are almost, people get promoted and everyone around them is like, well, they were kind of already doing it. So it's focus less on the title and focus more on what's that next level and what's required at that next level. And then whenever possible, just start doing it. Because the best promotions are when people are like, oh yeah, they totally deserved it. And oh, they're not a director or a VP. I thought they were a director or a VP, because those behaviors are already apparent in conversations and meetings and in decisions.
Mhm. I remember reading a book years ago that was, it was aimed at women who want to get ahead. And it was like, and it was, this is the, classic 80s book, dress for where you want to be, not where you are. And it always stuck with me though, because there's something about like, if you want to be a VP, then start having that mindset. If you want to be a director, start having that mindset. How would that person be thinking? And I think that curiosity about, talking to your boss and saying, not, I want a promotion, but just more, those questions like, hey, how else could I be adding value? What else could I be thinking of? Who else should I be getting to know in this organization? Right? Who are the people that, I should be connecting with and learning from? And, and that's the way you build your informal mentorship and your support network as well. So I love all those things you're saying.
Glenn, you're
Look it up.
touching on the concept of personal brand. And I
Mm,
and I feel like it's worth mentioning because I do think it's a strategic lever. I really
yes.
do. It like that concept of, dress for the job you want, not the job you got.
Yeah.
It's just part of like how you show up and the impression that you leave across the whole organization. It really matters.
Mhm.
Are you someone that, to Anna's point, when you get promoted, does everyone in the whole organization go, oh, of course? Because that's the right promotion. So I think that you have that concept of how do I show up and show everyone that I'm ready for that next level and have the leadership behaviors where you're, making this positive impact everywhere you go. I think it really matters. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's often those subtle things, right? So here's something that I think I see a lot of the clients we work with kind of struggling with. Um, they were on a trajectory, things were going well, life was good, and then all of a sudden they're not being invited to that meeting anymore. They're maybe, if you're using a 9 box in your organization, maybe they've slid out of the box that was the future promotion box down to something else. And yet it's really unclear what's happened to them, right? And so I'm curious from both of you, like, what takes somebody from being a fast tracker to suddenly a question mark? What are the gaps that will emerge? And maybe it's different at different levels, but curious to hear where you've seen somebody who everybody was betting on, and then all of a sudden it goes a little sideways. Anna, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I think, Glenn, you and I have talked about this too, when a strength becomes a liability, right?
Mhm.
And I think when you're an individual performer or individual contributor or a first-time people leader, you're rewarded for different things. And when you don't evolve how you show up to that next level, all of those things that you were being rewarded for are now the things that people are like, okay, Anna's over indexing on this, or, she's not, I look at it as an evolution. Um, so I would say that's the first thing. I'm a big believer in delegation and letting go. I think that is also sometimes a career staller for people. And I would say surrounding yourself with people that will give you that honest feedback, because the more senior you get, the more difficult it is to get that really impactful, honest, actionable feedback. I'm a huge fan of the idea, Tasha Urich's idea of a loving critic. So a loving critic is someone who cares deeply for you enough to tell you the truth, giving you honest, constructive feedback, with always having your growth in mind. And so
Mhm.
think about that balance of candor and support, and think about who your loving critics are. It's an intentional exercise, but those loving critics have been game changing for me in my career, because they're the people who are like, I need to give you some feedback. You're responding, you're reacting, not responding. That makes people defensive. Like I've just gotten such targeted feedback that I wasn't aware of. I thought they were
Mhm.
strengths. And so, the radical candor framework from Kim Scott is another one around, care personally and challenge. So, those would be two things that I would encourage people to look into, but especially the idea of who are your loving critics and how do you
Yeah.
lean on them?
I think that's so huge. And I want to just sort of double click on what you said about the strengths becoming liabilities, because I think that's actually what's very hard. You've built a career, and if you've been successful, it's typically because of those strengths. And that is the blind spot and the Achilles heel of a lot of successful people is that, but this is my strength. Yes, I've got this liability, but isn't my strength good enough? You know what I mean? Like, can I overpower it with these strengths? And yet leadership is so situational, right? Leadership is so situational, and you can't come at everything with the hammer of that powerful strength you have. So how do you learn how to finesse and flex your approach so that you have other tools to go to? That is tricky without watering down what is your secret sauce, right? Like, I think this is the constant thing that we constantly have to think about. Nicola, what would you add to this conversation?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think it happens in everyone's career that
Yeah.
you sort of take a knock in at some point, right? Or you got a leader that doesn't see you as brilliantly as the last one did. I think in those moments, just being really kind to yourself and saying, it's okay, you'll recover from this, consistently showing up with that impact orientation, it's going to get back there. I love this. I agree that as you get higher and higher up in an organization, your sharp edges become increasingly felt. So those overplayed strengths that become detractors, they're felt more in a bigger way by people
Mhm.
as you become more senior. So I say to people, you've got to soften your edges the more that you go up, because so I think being aware of where you've got sharp edges, or what do you become under stress or pressure? What are those,
Mhm. Yeah.
what kind of exhibits when you're under a lot of pressure, and being really clear about that. And I think when you've got that trusted circle of peers, I ask really honest questions, and I sort of almost force radical candor by saying, can you tell me what you think as a leader it'd be great if I did more or less of? I think that just sort of almost the people that are in your corner that are your friends is just really getting you to try and create the self-awareness of where your impact can be felt a bit roughly, so that you're aware, so that when the feedback comes, or if it's not a surprise. I think with that self-awareness of just encouraging people to be radically honest with you, I think is really important, because to your point, no one walks into your office when you're in a senior role and just gives you feedback if they're lower down in the organization. It's just not, it doesn't happen. So
Mhm.
I think really encouraging people to know that you've got this sort of leadership approach, which is openness, and feedback is the breakfast of champions, really helps. um, but then I would just say, if take it on, process it, but just don't also know there's no problem. If you're in that top box, you've got what it takes. So just get back in there and don't take it as a hit, and don't wallow for too long. Turn up the next day and recover, because honestly, we're like high performance athletes. And the mindset that we bring to the way that we're able to drive impact requires a lot of self kindness, and it requires a lot of support, and it requires a really positive internal dialogue. So that's what I would say.
The only something you said, Nicola, just reminded me of another point that I think is important to make. I think the more senior you become, it's critical to be really clear about your own values, because then it starts to matter, right? I was in a situation where I had an incredible partnership with the CEO. We were doing incredible things together. Then leadership changed, and suddenly I wasn't that high performer anymore. And I think if that happens, also stop and really evaluate, what are your values? Is there a values alignment, or is there a values misalignment? Because at senior levels, it matters. And if there's a values misalignment, nothing you can do will change that. And you have to just stop and make a difficult decision around, can I deal with the values rub and hold my nose and continue, or do I get off the bus, which is not an easy decision to make.
No, I love that you're bringing that up because I've been in this high potential space now for over 25 years. And my conclusion is high potential is in the eye of the beholder. I've seen people who are seen as high potentials under one type of leader. Because here's the thing, we have brains, we have biases, we have things that we all look for. And if your boss and you clicked and you were doing amazing under that individual, and you get somebody who comes in who has a totally different way of seeing the world, and isn't somebody who maybe also already made decisions about you, because that'll happen, right? That's actually got nothing to do with you. And I think, Nicola, to your point, it doesn't mean you're not it doesn't mean that you're not a strong performer. I think the thing that I see for a lot of people is that that kind of thing can really erode your confidence
Yeah.
when you start feeling yourself going on that downward spiral, right? I remember being in that situation where all of a sudden I thought, oh my God, I've had this career track record. And was I delusional? As soon as I started questioning that with myself, I thought, okay, Glenn, this is like being in an abusive relationship. I'm being gaslit. I gotta get the hell out of here. And that's where having like the support people around you, I think, because that's a confidence spiral,
Mhm.
and you've got to get yourself back on it. So I think one of the things that, Nicola, you said earlier around, this idea of having kind of the people around you, and Anna, you said it too, right? It's like the people around you who are going to give you the real deal feedback, and then having those career boo-boos and missteps and getting back on the horse. I guess I'd love both of you to share, when you've personally had those little hiccups, what has been your go-to to get yourself back to center within yourself? Because I think it's a tough market out right there right now. I think a lot of people are being turfed, not because of anything, not because of performance at all. But that stings. It's not nice to be dumped in a relationship. It's not nice to be let go in an organization, even if it's a numbers game. So what would you say for people? What's worked for you in terms of rebuilding your confidence when you've had a wobble?
I mean, Anna, you've mentioned this, and I think it's very, very wise, which is, your career is not who you are. Um, I got let go once. Our new leader came in, and I got let go on parental leave. And it was I just didn't see it coming. I couldn't believe that someone would, let me go, and I had such great performance feedback in my career. But actually, what I know, and it is a hard market, so I'm not downplaying this. Honestly, there are just organizations out there that will value you more, where you will be happier, and the thing that I'd say is to, getting a job, it's getting harder. AI is making it harder. The value of human connections, the value of people that you've worked with in the past, they really matter. I think that keeping our networks well established and connected really matters. I think that asking people for, it really matters. So I think having a robust approach to how to go about getting a job and trying lots and lots of different pathways and ways, and because it's very hard to apply on Indeed with hundreds of other people and an AI bot to notice you. I think it's getting really, really difficult. But I
Mhm.
think that you having this self-identity, just coming back to the main point, which is I am not going to be defined by someone else's either values or perception or bias. I'm not going to allow that actually to define how I see myself. I am my own best friend. I am here to, and I'm my biggest backer and my biggest support. And I think making sure that we have a very clear sense of who we are, our values, um, our why, what energizes us, and then going out and finding alignment to that is ultimately our best insurance policy when it kicks you. But when it happens within an organization and you're not losing your job, the only way through it is to turn up and just keep shining and keep making impactful work, incorporating all of the feedback that you're getting, but the consistency of being able to recover and show that you've heard. I think it's important when given feedback that you acknowledge that you've heard it. I think that that really matters, but I think you just have to back yourself. You know, high performance athletes focus as much on recovery and their mindset as what they do in any form of training on practice. And so I think the way that you reset, the way that you go and rebuild your energy and find yourself back to full, is critical for us to understand, because we are high performance athletes literally turning up and giving 10 hours a day of extreme high investment energy. And I think we have to see ourselves as athletes, and I think you have to be very aware. I learnt that Netflix was not rebuilding me in a deep way. It was a distraction, but you have to find the things that genuinely find yourself, your nervous system to rebalance, you to come back to having a loving internal dialogue. I think that really matters.
Fantastic. Anna, what do you want to add?
I just want to add a couple things because I recently went through this journey myself, and I consider myself a pretty confident person. But going back to when your career is a big part of your identity and that career is no longer there, my confidence did take a hit. And so I did a couple of things. One is I shifted the narrative to I've been released. I've been released to now do the things that I really want to do and really make an impact and work with the people that I choose to work with. And the other thing that really helped me rebuild my confidence was I looked at my network, and someone gave me this advice, and I can't remember who it was, but it was so powerful and impactful. And I categorized my network into A, B, C buckets. And my A bucket were my loving critics, the people that knew me, knew what I could do, saw what I was capable of. And I just connected with them to say, look, this has happened. I'm reevaluating my next chapter. What are your thoughts? And they were people going, you're on my A list. They were people that I had multiple conversations with. And then the B list were people that I knew I didn't know as well, but I reached out and still got input into, what do you think? What are you seeing in the market? What feedback do you have? What do you think my strengths are? And then my C bucket were the people I had likely one 15-minute shot at. And so I left that C bucket until the end, until I figured out what was happening, what I wanted to do, what my new narrative was. And it's taken a while to rebuild the confidence, a lot longer than I thought. But I have to say, I wasn't born with a lot of patience. When they were giving out patience, I was in the shoe line. I'm like, I want shoes more than I want patience.
Yeah.
And so it's taken a while, but I feel like I'm finally there, and it's been a really, really tough journey.
It's a tough journey. It's funny. A lot of people say to me, oh my gosh, I don't know how being an entrepreneur, that must be so hard. And I always say to anybody who's in a job hunt, you're an entrepreneur. The business is you, right? And so all those rejections and all those applications, it's no different than me knocking on doors and trying to talk to people 18 years ago about peer coaching. And people didn't know what I was talking about, right? So, it requires, I think it requires that support network. I mean, Anna was part of my support network in those early days, as part of my advisory committee. You've got to surround yourself with people who can keep you going through those times, right? We had a question come in, which I just want to get to in the Q&A, which was this is sort of the idea of managing up, I think, and what you can do. I think there's sort of a couple of themes that I'd love to sort of think about here, because you two are, okay, you're a little bit more evolved, let's face it. You're CPOs, you're thinking about people issues, but I will say, my experience, not everybody's like that. Some leaders tend to lean more towards results. The people thing is kind of a second thought. They don't think about how their behavior impacts other people. So question came in the chat was, what happens if the senior executive works all hours and leaders emulate that culture? So that's almost like they're working all hours, and that we've just been saying, like, the expectations, no, put boundaries, set priorities, da, da, da. I think, when it comes to managing up, And I remember when I started the roundtable and I said I wanted to focus on high potentials, one of my HR advisors said, yeah, one of the challenges is for high potentials is when they have a low potential manager. So, not all managers are created equal, let's face it. So advice on how to deal with the boss who's maybe working all hours and setting a different thing, because you see this bleed into a culture, right? Where then all of a sudden everybody's doing that. What do you do if you're that, you're trying to create some buffer for your team? But then also, like, how do you have career conversations if your manager really isn't all that clued out? So I'm going to double barrel the question. Start with that, whichever one you want, but who wants to jump in on this? Nicola, I see a big smile
Oh,
on
I
you.
was just seeing, if Anna wanted to jump in. Okay, on the first one, every company has got a different culture and a different norms and different unwritten rules. And I think just knowing what they are. So, I'd say there's peaks and valleys. We went through a huge transaction at work, and diligence lasted 6 months last year. Work was very, very, very busy, and we were all working really long hours. And that was a reality of the business at that time. I think what I'd look for in terms of unhealthiness is your team the only one in the organization working? You need to be able to read the room. Some companies have got more in office than not. Some have got ones where meetings have to be, in camera, they can't be off camera. Some of them have got, whatever the norms are in your culture, be really clear on what the unwritten rules are, because if you don't have the awareness to be able to read the room around what the performance culture signals are of what the company values, you're just gonna it's gonna impact you. I'm not saying at all that, working really, really hard and really long hours is right or normal, but just understand where the company's at. Is that a short-term thing? Is that everyone in the company is it? Just understand it, because I have had people say, look, why am I not being promoted? And it's like, because you don't kind of show that you care or that you're in as much as everyone else here. And I think you just need to just be aware of what does the company value. Again, focusing on impact and making sure that you care and you're really impact orientated is the defense to that. Your second question about what do you do with a manager? What was it, Glenn? It was like the manager who doesn't care about your development.
Well, yeah, like we're having a career conversation with this manager is going to be tricky, or having boundaries conversation with this manager is going to be tricky. Like,
Mhm.
what sort of advice do you have if you have a manager where maybe there isn't great psychological safety, you don't feel safe, you're a little nervous about bringing it up? What advice would you have there?
I think there's an elegant way to do it whereby you're not going to be perceived as that. Let's try and first go in not triggering their defensiveness. Let's try and do that. Let's go in with an elegant way of approaching this whereby you're not confrontational, obstructive, seen as entitled, or even that concept of setting boundaries. Let's use different language, which is let's ask curious questions to understand more about where that manager is at or what insights they might have for me. So I would just approach it really trying not to trigger their defensiveness, but to really take as much and make it really useful for you. Get insights, see it as an opportunity to just extract insights that are really helpful for you. Questions like, can you share with me whether or not you think that development goal, is on point, or do you have any feedback on that? I'd really just ask open-ended questions to try and make that manager kind of feel safe and not threatened and defensive. That's how I would approach it. Because the reality is that if you don't have a supportive manager, I, I don't know if you can work with it and you can get them to kind of get on board by showing that you're not a threat. Fantastic. If you can't and you just don't have a great manager, I have typically run my development off to the side. I just haven't relied on them for anything. I've involved them as a stakeholder to let them know, but I think you're kind of pushing mud uphill, trying to get someone who's not on your team or not wanting to or able to really help grow and develop you. And I think you actually taking jobs where you have working for fantastic leaders is career advice that not enough people talk about, because your career is genuinely set up for success when you've got someone that is passionate, interested, and committed to you, is a supporter, is going to back your development, that is going to give you feedback and insights. So I've also at times just had a development plan that I was pursuing, accessing networks outside of my organization if necessary, as a way to make sure that I'm getting, what I need.
Yeah. And I think what you make me think of in that is that I think too many people outsource their careers to their managers or to the organization, right? And it is so up to you to know, like, yeah, what are my values? What's important to me? But also, what can I offer the company? What are my talents? What are my skills? What am I interested in doing more of? And how am I having those conversations with people? Again, without worrying about, is that going to lead me to a position? I hear so many people will say to me, well, I don't want to talk about that because I don't see a role that's like that. That's not it. If you focus on what your strengths are and what you can bring to the table and what you're interested in doing, if there isn't a role in the organization, okay, maybe there it's somewhere else that you're meant to play. But trying to force fit your way into something is not going to give you career satisfaction in the long term. But I find a lot of people are afraid to do that because they're afraid that it's limiting opportunity. And then I've coached too many people that have in their 40s suddenly found themselves in a job that they're actually miserable in because they just kept saying yes, right? They just kept saying yes to stuff that they actually didn't really want to do. So you got to drive your own bus too. And anything that you would add about this, like that question?
The only thing I would add is and Glenn, I'm not just kissing your butt by saying this, but I know you run peer coaching programs, and those for me I've seen the impact that those have had in organizations. So because you don't feel alone.
Yeah.
You get so much resilience and courage and hope when you're having conversations and you hear people are experiencing the same things that you are within an organization, and they can offer a different perspective or point of view that you might have thought of. And the trust that's built in those groups is really, really impactful, to act as a sounding board and to have peer coaches and peer mentors. And I think to the point around when your manager, you're a high potential and your manager isn't, I think being transparent with your manager so they don't feel like they're being blindsided by that, and position it as you're adding on. So, I want to grow, so I'm getting perspective from this person, and the other person. And really just having an honest conversation with them. And I appreciate that that's not always easy and it doesn't always land. But going back to your point, you have to be really firm in what you want. And sometimes that means having uncomfortable conversations with your people leader. But I'm a huge fan of transparency, and that kind of lowers the defensiveness if you've been really open with your people leader about what you need and where you're getting it and what role they play.
I'm reflecting on this conversation. I think so much of career, like to truly have a career that you feel really good about and that you've sort of landed in a place that you're really enjoying your work. I mean, I really think careers have stages. And I always say to, people like in your 20s, like, don't friggin' worry about a title, like get experience, expose yourself, figure out what you really do love to do. And then in your 30s, you want to start honing that so that when you're in your 40s, you have choices. Right? You have amassed experience. You know what your worth is. I read Seth Godin's book, Lynchpin, years ago, and it really is about how do you become the linchpin that people, and I was just listening to actually a Good Hang with Amy Poehler, and she was interviewing Judge Judy, and Judge Judy has this great way she negotiates, man. Like you got to listen to that podcast if you're ever negotiating, but it's because she knew her worth. Right, you have to know your worth, and I think a lot of people in that I see in their careers, they've outsourced too much power to the organization. They don't understand their own value, and they don't have the courage to stand in that, right? So a lot of this is about developing your self-insight, understanding what you bring to the party. And then if they don't want that at the party, being okay with going, okay, I'm going to go find another party that does value and want me, which I think both of you sort of talked about earlier, right? I can't believe it. We've got 6 minutes left, so I'm going to have to close this off. So I'm going to ask the kind of last question to both of you. What's a career truth you wish more people in this sort of mid-career level, which is our primary audience, understood? Something that's really obvious from where you sit, but is rarely explained to people.
I would say people don't put enough stock into the question of how do people feel about working with me?
Hmm.
And I think people focus too much on results versus what the experience is working with you as a leader.
Mm.
And I would say, as a head of HR, I would look at who builds trust with their teams versus who's eroding it, who develops talent versus hoarding talent. Who elevates performance around their team and how do they do that? And where is culture lived versus, where is their true action around culture and values and not just words. And the last thing I'll say is I'm a huge advocate for tough love, because I think growth happens with honesty and with support behind that honesty.
Yeah, and isn't that true in every relationship in life? You know,
Mm.
not just leadership. Mine's actually pretty similar. Mine was when you think not about yourself and how you're showing up, but you really have that stakeholder perspective that I was talking about. And I just would apply it to upwards. So when you're thinking about managing up, really being clear, like not just turning up because this is how I turn up. If you're insightful and can understand what is it that my leader needs from me to be successful? What is it that's important to my leader? How do they want to communicate? What are their preferences? Who are they and how do I need to show up to them so that they think, gosh, I love working with you? Now, that advice has served me very, very well. Understanding genuine managing up. It's not about being manipulative or
Mm.
showing up with a facade. It's not what I'm talking about. It's being insightful enough to know what really matters to the people that make honestly decisions about your career. I think is not talked about enough. And I think really genuinely understanding what they need from you. I know that I've got someone that I can't throw big decisions on because they need time to process because they're a deeper think. So you've got to send the deck a week before, knowing that someone is fine for drop-ins and would rather things move fast than wait for my one-on-one. Just knowing how people want to be communicated with, what's important to them, what their values are, and then making sure that you've got the agility to be able to show up differently for that leader and what's important. I think we don't talk enough. I traveled to 3 different organizations with the one leader by just knowing how to do that because they were like, gosh, it's easy working with you. And I think um, spending time thinking about managing up really genuinely meeting the needs. I think that it would be something that I'd share that I think is valuable. Yeah.
I think that's really great advice. And I think sometimes we think that the people up above us have it more figured out than we do at whatever level we're at. And I always sort of joke around with like the more junior executives that we work with that they don't have it figured out. Like if you think your CEO is some magical oracle and knows how this is all going to work, they don't. And so I love that. I think because some of that too is about giving your leaders some grace as well, right? They
Yeah.
are not perfect people. You are not a perfect person.
Yeah.
You can wish they would change their approach and behavior. They're not going. I've been married
Yeah.
for 25 plus years. I can tell you, hoping the behavior is going to change doesn't happen. So what can we control? Control your controllables. You can control yourself. So I just want to thank you. I'm going to turn this back over to Colleen, but I just want to thank you both for a really engaging conversation today. I know we could have probably kept this going for another 2 hours at least, but we all got to get back to our day job. So Colleen, over to you.
Thanks, Glenn. I was just going to say the same thing. I feel like there was lots of great dialogue in the chat as well, and I think we could have kept this conversation going for a long time. But just a couple of things to let you know. So we do have one seat remaining in our Roundtable for Leaders open enrollment program, which kicks off next month. So if you have any high potential leaders that are looking to accelerate their development to the next level, this would be a great option for them. Feel free to reach out to me for more information. And join us next month, or actually in May, when Glenn talks to Dan Pontefract about his new book, The Future of Work is Gray, all about the untapped value of age in the workforce. And then lastly, please stay in touch with us. You can find us on LinkedIn, or go to our website as well. Feel free to reach out to us at info@goroundtable.com. Thank you everyone for attending. And thanks, Anna and Nicola, for your time today. Such a great discussion. And we have recorded as well. So we will be sending that out, I think, to everyone afterwards. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.